Just have her look at it. Keep track of that. But we're sending a new thing out here. Thank you. Let's sheet her down. When we drop. Alright. Add these other thoughts. You know what? This one's Josh's. Is that one on? Yeah.
Have you done it?
Not in this format before. I was on a panel long time ago for South Dakota Public TV.
Right.
And I'm not, I'm the vice president of program development at Helpline.
Yeah.
So I don't work day in, day out. Suicide prevention program, but all of our staff is out at training today.
I did training for you, your folks.
You
I was at Urban Indians,
okay.
and I did the cultural awareness training.
Oh, for one of our interns.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I had one of the ladies there. I forgot her name. I don't really bad with names, but she came. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have an interesting relationship with Helpline. I started in this role in August, end of August. And then 6 years ago, I was there as research development director. So I took a 4-year break and I was on their board of directors. And so this position was new and it just worked out. So I came home in August. So
Oh,
I've
nice.
been in this role since August and I really,
What'd you move from?
I was at Southeast Technical Institute.
Yeah.
I was a student success advisor, career coordinator out there.
Yeah.
I love working with youth and students. And my training with the Helpline 2 years before that, just the pressure you put on there. They would do
Yes.
a lot.
Yes. I actually just
The only thing we're using this for is
I
power.
went to Canada from Canada, and I went to
We're
go
calling
do
those guys
crisis intervention. I went to go do
calling the remote guys here for on the
because somebody committed suicide. So
it's running. That's the only way we can finish a nice transition between.
then there I have somebody commit suicide. Do it first. So about that.
Josh, is it you I'm in?
Some of where
What?
Tell my story is yeah,
Worst case scenario is we're just gonna not have anything.
I'll be able to help
going out.
through that outcome from there's all of that here.
And what's this supposed to be?
This one, we're actually calling two guys up here at this point inside.
We're just looking at
So we want that Stephanie.
conversation.
Right.
15 we had. We're just looking at
What's Stephanie number?
You're more
Matt.
Stephanie
and then we have teams. Hey, you can call us. You can call us. You're like, fine, we're ready. So it's just
Stephanie's email.
each youth connection. How do we
Alright, let's try SSDIXLN.
So looking at the new ways that people are
And then Clark.
I just got it. That's what
We're at. Where's EL or something?
We've had a few text conversations where
You want to ask her, send her a text to see if she'll accept the invitation?
Facebook messages.
She's probably still sitting on that thing by herself.
I feel like working with that issue.
Tell her to drop out of that,
Safe.
right?
Is that what it
exit out of the other hangout and sign up.
I'll talk a little bit about statistics. I think I'll say that up here for you to talk about. And
Are we
all
running
of
on
our
class right now?
programs, we have our texting program, but then we provide a lot of training in high school,
Yeah.
in families, and then we provide support for
And there's no audio on out, and we muted that.
learning more about the
Where's
resources.
our microphones? I'm sorry.
I'm going to do a little bit of it. How you using it?
Okay.
We have our mixer on that side there, Bill. So we don't need Josh's mic ever on.
Good.
We don't need mine on.
Hi.
Are we hot?
We're good.
We're good?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to stay sitting so that the people online can see what we're doing. I'm Matt Walls with Keystone Treatment Center, also with the Jason Foundation to Prevent Teen Suicide. I want to welcome you all to our first inaugural Partners in Education educational series event. And since we're working so hard on the issue of teen suicide, it's just that's such an important topic in South Dakota, we wanted to bring together the experts. We wanted to bring together people with an interest in that issue, both in person and online. So I want to wave hello to my online viewers. They can see us through a camera right there, and they should be able to hear us, right? Can they hear me? Can they hear me? We don't know. We believe so. Okay.
Wouldn't do much good.
And it's pretty exciting to be able to webcast this live to an audience around the state and around the region. I think we've got at least 40 people joining us. We've got a group in Spearfish that is put together, their staff and volunteers, and we've got some other groups of students who are also watching our webcast today. I want to welcome them and others that are viewing online, and want to welcome you here to the bakery. Very glad you could join us. What we're going to do is I'm going to acknowledge our partners, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So first I want to acknowledge the good folks at the bakery in Sioux Falls. If you're not familiar with the bakery, it is a shared workspace on steroids. It is just a wonderful community gathering of wonderful like-minded entrepreneurial people who care. And what they want to do is help communities come together, which is what they're helping, which is why they're interested in helping us with this series. We're also grateful to NAMI and the folks involved with mental illness community, because we know that there's a lot of folks in the mental health world that are seeking services and don't know where to turn. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Same with chemical dependency services. And we want to bring all of us together. I think right now there's a lot of divide between mental health and chemical dependency and social work and some of our other sectors. And we're just so excited to bring us all together under one roof in unity, because the patients and the people seeking our services, they don't care where our funding comes from. They don't care what our certification might look like. What they want is help, and they want it now. So we're very grateful to be able to partner in this way and to be able to come together. So without further ado, in case I missed anything, did we miss anything? I'm going to defer to our experts over here in the corner. Okay. I'm gonna go right in to Stephanie Swiker-Dixon. Hopefully she can hear me. She's joining us from the Front Porch Coalition in Rapid City. Stephanie is a great expert on suicide, especially teen suicide, and she's going to speak to teen suicide in the West River of South Dakota area and what they're seeing. Stephanie, welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some of the statistics, how big of an epidemic this is. And basically, what you may or may not know is going to alarm you. The extent of the problem, how much of an epidemic it is. Some people are aware of this, some people are not. Our epidemic not so silent anymore. We look at this as a growing problem. Those of us who are in the field, we know how difficult and how traumatic this really is. But those of you who are not as familiar with it, not quite as familiar with it. So, Eric, you are moving the slides. Could you go to next slide, please? With youth suicide and the extent of the problem, nationwide it's the second leading cause of death for teens ages 12 to 18. And
can I turn on my mic hot?
18 to 24.
Okay.
But very alarming
Stephanie,
here
I'm calling you.
in our part of the country.
She's halfway done her presentation. Sorry. That's not doing
Stephanie,
it
I'm
live.
calling you.
Being the leading cause of death.
She put you on mute. She's busy. Yes. And you've seen her do that too.
Okay.
Tell her again.
Stephanie, can you hear
Stephanie,
us?
we're this poor woman.
She just
Oh no.
Oh, she's
Oh,
fine.
here we go. Hi, Stephanie. Your audio is looping. So we're gonna you can come back to the camera. We don't want to scare you away. You're doing great, but we're gonna use your audio from my phone to feed into our system rather than your mic on your computer. If you could please mute your mic on your computer, that it is.
Echoing very badly. I can hear you echoing, so I turned my volume down.
I wonder what the delay difference is going to be. It's
There's
going to be like
a
one of
huge
them back.
echo.
Okay, on our side too. So that's why we're on the phone. Where are you at now?
I just shut it down and I wasn't sure what function.
No, you're still live on the video screen. So come back to your computer, please.
You want me to talk to you on the phone?
Speak into your phone. Look into your computer. We're going to work with technology today, baby.
Okay. Exactly what you want to do.
Okay,
Smarter than the
this is great. So we're going to go through your PowerPoint slides, and you just talk on the phone, and I've got you on speakerphone. That's going to feed into the mic, and that's going to broadcast to our webcast community, and people can hear you from my phone, right?
Hopefully.
We're up by the mic.
Okay. Here we
Great.
go.
Here we go.
Rock and roll.
All
All
right.
right.
So, as we see nationwide, teen suicide being the second leading cause of death here in South Dakota, what we have is it progressing to be the leading cause of death for youth ages 12 to 18 and 18 to 24. So staring into that, it's reality. And what I'm seeing here, West River, is that for, and it's the same here, but what I'm starting to see West River is it could be progressing to the leading cause of death, even for our young adults. And that's in our young people in their 20s. And when we look at attempts, I've got the statistics there, 8.9% or 1 out of 11. Possibly that's underreported. And what do I mean by that? With it possibly being underreported,
is that with teens, do they tell us everything? No. How many teens self-harm? How many teens engage in reckless behaviors? How many teens drink, use drugs, and simply drive recklessly and don't hit anybody? Many, many teens. When we look at, for a death by suicide, how many teens attempt or self-harm, that could be, for every death by suicide, that could be 1 to 200 teens. So this could be very, very underreported. Numbers we don't know, those who self-harm, and that extent of the problem is very underreported. Next slide, please. The signs of suicide among youth, and this I could spend the whole hour and a half going over. And if anybody wants additional training, go to our website, go to Keystone, contact Matt, and we can learn more about this, but I'm briefly going to go over this. Obvious signs are making statements to threaten to harm oneself or someone else. You know, we look at, there's been a lot of homicides in the Rapid City area, West River, across the country. There can be a lot of threats, undertones and threats to harm oneself. And school shootings, that's a whole nother topic, that a lot of those signs of suicide are there. Talking about, writing about, drawing about death and suicide. That feeling of hopelessness, worthlessness, feeling like you're going to be a burden to others, that people feel like they're going to be better off without you, that I'm just making life difficult for those around me. And again, like I said, the self-harming behaviors, acting very recklessly. And for teenagers, it's not like I said, not just engaging in a lot of drug and alcohol use, driving recklessly, engaging in a lot of risky sexual behavior, a lot of those things that are unhealthy behaviors. Withdrawing from friends and family. When I talk to young people, I always ask them, you know, are your friends not engaging in the sports activities, not engaging in homecoming activities, not doing the things that they once used to love to do? Anxiety, rage, anger, that increase in that type of behavior. Something that is different. Something that is unexplained and very different. And that goes on to the next slide. Those clues to look for. The first one can be a little tricky because we watch people who've had a previous suicide attempt, and this goes with all ages, but very commonly with young people because they sometimes can be impulsive, but not all the time. Don't let the impulsive behavior and that thought of kids are impulsive fool you. They can plan things out without telling you. Look for these undertones. And remember, as I go through some of these, and again, there are many, that someone can not tell you anything. And you can see some of these But know that with suicide, it's never the result of just one thing. It's never the result of just a breakup. It's never the result of being a victim of bullying. It's always a multitude of different things. If you see 2, 3, 4, 5 of these things, this is when it's time to ask, what's going on? How can I help? And are you having thoughts of suicide? Here's the number you should call. Or here's where we can go to get help. With young people, we look at chronic truancy. We look at bullying. Bullying doesn't cause suicide, but it is one of those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contributing factors. I put perfectionism on there because I have seen cases where straight A student, absolute perfectionism, have all the friends that they could want. Why did this happen? You never know when it's going to happen. You have to ask when you see something that is different and changing, and someone is all of a sudden talking about dying, death, I need a gun, I need pills, I need something. Lots of unexplained physical symptoms, backache, headache, a stomach ache, and again, fighting with friends and family. Next slide, please. Why has this become such an epidemic? And West River, we're seeing a suicide happen every week. Not just youth, but of all ages. But why is it happening? What's contributing to this problem? Biggest thing over there, alcohol. Alcohol use, increased abuse. People use this to self-medicate because they're struggling with mental illness, substance abuse problems. They're struggling with a lot of things. They're struggling with a lot of those signs, symptoms, clues that I told you about here minutes ago. And so often I'm seeing that they are not getting help for their mental illness or their substance abuse disorder. Unfortunately, I find a lot of the time parents of those youth do not take them in for treatment. Why? It's not my child. My child is healthy. I don't want my child to be sick. I don't want my child to have this problem. Or the parents are struggling with their own mental health problems, substance abuse problems, or lots of other varying factors of parents working 2, 3 jobs and I don't have time, or insurance issues, or I can't afford this. A multitude of different problems. We are seeing an increased use of drugs, lots of access to drugs in our community. Most common ones are listed there as methamphetamines and marijuana. Those are the 2 most common right now that are contributing to death by suicide. Of course, we're seeing lots more in synthetics, a little bit of a rise in heroin, and of course, prescription drug dependence combined with alcohol. Everything seems to be combined with too much alcohol. Alcohol is that depressant that causes more depression. It does not make you feel better in the end. A lot of abuse among people of all ages, but the youth are saying physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, a lot of abuse. Additional reasons are on the next slide, and they continue again to be, like I said, relationship and family issues. When I talk to kids, the first thing I ask them is, how many of you have a trusted adult that you can confide in? Half of them raise their hands. These are teenagers that don't have someone that they can go to. This is part of a suicide prevention program we implement in schools, trusted adults. And that has made a difference if you can find a trusted adult. If it's not a family member, it's got to be someone in the school, it's got to be someone within somewhere in the community. And as we're starting to see West River, and we're losing young people in their 20s, their early 20s, late 20s, these young adults have difficulty moving forward in life. They may have financial issues, they may have relationship issues, they may start to become parents. Then they start to have legal issues and financial issues. And these legal issues are not major felonies. They're not facing 30 years in prison. They're drug and alcohol related offenses that are not going to result in I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. It's just having a difficult way of coping. So again, as mental health providers, behavioral health providers, medical providers, or community service providers, it's helping people navigate their way starting out in life. And as you're going to hear later in the panel, trying to educate teachers who really are the trusted adults. That's key. A teacher is a trusted adult for someone. A teacher's going to look for this. When you see this anonymous quote from somebody, 2 people have told me this over the years. I'd rather be in the hospital than at home. Or I'd rather have my child in the hospital than at home. This is some scary issues that we face because they worry about them harming themselves again when they're released from the hospital. Or we don't have other resources, mental health or otherwise, to keep our youth safe. Why? And that's the next slide. With untreated mental illness, youth not receiving treatment, we have to work together as a community with parent and family education. That's what our Jason Flatt Act is going to improve. It's also going to provide community education. That's what we do. But teacher education is going to bring us parent education. It's going to bring us community education. It's going to bring us trusted adults for our youth. It's going to help improve what we've started here in our Rapid City school system, youth and peer-to-peer mentors. But also what we do is healthcare, behavioral healthcare training so that when teachers refer kids to help, that we have our providers trained and ready to respond. But another component of how we can help as a community and as service providers is making sure our first responders, our court services, our foster care system provides a good coordination of care. And that's one of the things that we struggle with actually with West River. We're improving it, but a lot of our kids are getting stuck in the system. How does DSS help kids when kids don't want to go home because parents are struggling themselves? That's a huge problem. And for time's sake, I think I'm going to end here. And my contact information is at the end of my presentation. If you want to email me or call me, email is the best way to reach me. I can certainly answer questions about any of these slides or the last one as to kind of how the community can kind of work together and improve what it's struggling with at this point, and search for some ways to improve this system so kids aren't stuck in the court system or having to rely on first responders. Our first responders are really at the front lines and at this point actually exhausted, but doing a good job to at least try to save some lives.
Very good.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. We are going to do a Q&A session at the end, just so you guys are aware if we have a little bit of time. And how we're going to do that, since we've got a web audience and since we've got web participants, is that if you've got a question, just write it down on one of the little notepads that are in the back, and then pass those up to me, and I'll ask them to the right presenter.
And we'll call her back.
Yeah, and we'll call you back on the phone, Stephanie, when we get to that Q&A session. So thank you, and you can stay on the video feed, but we'll hang up on the phone.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for everyone for bearing with us with technology today. We're doing our very best to integrate a lot of different things all at once. And thanks to our tech people, Eric Miller and Josh and Clint, doing a fantastic job. We're going to go in, we're going to jump right into the next piece, which is the East River side of suicide prevention. Betsy Holman Schuster, I'm still getting used to saying her last name.
I am too. I was recently married, so the whole thing is new.
She's with the 211 helpline, and they do a lot of great work especially reaching out, or allowing people to reach out via phone, and they've got some really interesting programs that she's going to talk about relative to teen suicide. So go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone joining us today and online as well. And as Matt said, I work for the Helpline Center in Sioux Falls, and I'm the Vice President of Program Development there. And we provide prevention services, intervention services, and postvention services. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the services we provide. Stephanie did a great job talking about what are some of the signs that you may notice in youth. So I'm going to talk about what are the services available. So we might skip a few slides, Eric. Oh, he's not. Eric, I might need you to... The first couple of slides in the presentation, we just talked about stats, but that has been pretty well known that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. But a bullet point on here that really jumped out at me is every hour and 44 minutes a youth dies by suicide in our nation. And so it's a local problem, but it's also a national problem. So just thinking about that, during our time here, it's another family member, another community, another person, another individual may be affected by that. We'll go to the next slide real quick. We'll actually skip 2 slides. Stephanie mentioned this, the South Dakota suicide attempt data. This was really interesting. We just started collecting attempt data in 2009. And so this is an interesting statistic now that we have at our hands. And so when ER departments are now track that. So when someone comes into the ER, if it is a suicide attempt, they track that and we have that. So if we go to the next slide, between 2009 and 2013 in South Dakota, there were 659 suicide attempts that were verified with the emergency departments. So if we think about that statistic as well, we were able to intervene, get those people to safety with those 659 attempts. And so that's just another thing I think as we bring more promotion, not promotion, but awareness to this issue, there's other things that we're able to look at and help with youth. Next slide. In Minnehaha County, we have about 25 annual deaths by suicide. And so last year in 2015, we just got this from the coroner's report, we had 1 teen death to suicide. However, 2 years ago, we had 5 deaths to suicide. So it fluctuates a little bit, but it is affecting all of our communities in South Dakota. So if you think about crisis services at the Helpline Center, this is what we're focused of a lot more of my presentation on, is we answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So we answer 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255. And so the Helpline Center, we're based in Sioux Falls. However, we provide services statewide to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and then we also answer the 211 information referral line in 14 counties. And so when we talk about that crisis line, we have crisis calls coming in on both numbers. And so our staff are trained crisis workers, so regardless of how that phone call comes in, whether it comes in on 211 or whether it comes in on the 1-800-273-TALK line, we follow the same protocols to make sure that we talk with that caller and get them to safety if they're having thoughts of suicide. We are one of 160 crisis centers in the nation that answers that phone line, and we're accredited by that as well. So if you skip to the next slide, Eric. Each year, we're just starting our 2015 data, but each year we, every call that comes in, we track what it came in for, what was the need, what was the referral, the contact notes. So we have a lot of data in our system. So every year we produce the Community Trends Report, and we're just starting on that for 2015. So this data is actually from 2014. So last year, in 2014, or 2 years ago, we took 1,599 total calls, suicide-related calls. And so if you see the breakout and you can see the chart, 777 of those calls came through the 211 phone number, and 1,486 of those calls came through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So that is looking across the state, and then we're able to break those calls down into areas if needed. And so when someone calls a Suicide Prevention Lifeline, you may ask what happens. We, if the person is having thoughts of suicide, and sometimes it's the person on the phone, sometimes it might be a third party, a person concerned about their friend or family member, we assess them for the risk of suicide, and where are they at in that process? Is it thoughts of suicide? Do they have a plan, or is that plan in action? If that person's life is in immediate danger, and we deem that, we intervene with police intervention. So we work with all the 911s in the state, because if that person's life is in danger, we need to get them help. And so that is one of the things as well that we work well with all the emergency personnel. The other thing that we do is when someone calls a Suicide Prevention Lifeline, we offer follow-up calls. And so we say, hey, can we call you back in a day, 24 hours? Or sometimes it's a matter of, we might call you back in 5 hours to make sure if they produce a safety plan with us, are they following that safety plan? Or if they're having thoughts of suicide, but usually they do this when they're doing that. Or maybe they say, well, I'm going to contact my counselor, and they create that safety plan. We do a follow-up call with them to say, hey, did you follow that safety plan, or do we need an intervention, or what are the next steps to make sure that they're safe? So that's happening as well. Next slide. A cool program that was started in 2012 is we have crisis texting in 36 high schools. So we piloted this program in 2012 with 3 high schools, and it's expanded to 36. And so we know, I am not a teen anymore, but if my mother calls, a lot of times I push reply by text message instead of answering the phone. I think it's that generation thing of we communicate differently. And teens especially, they like texting. I think the average teen texts 60 times a day, and I like to believe that's probably on the lower side of that estimate. And so in 2014, we had 233 text conversations with teens in those high schools. 9,300 students were educated about the crisis texting program. I just asked for the numbers real quickly as I was walking out of the office. In 2015, right now the estimate is we were at over 400 conversations through text messaging with teens. So just the growth of that program. And it's really interesting when we are texting back and forth with teens, we tell them, you can dial 211, you can dial the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and they'll reply, I prefer to keep texting you. And so all the same protocols are followed it's the same people answering the phones as the crisis texting, and we assess safety plans, we assess intervention, we assess what is the follow-up as well. And so that is a very cool program. We have staff that goes out into high school, so I don't know if we have anybody listening to high schools. If the program is not in your high school, we can certainly open that discussion up with you on how you can get that into your high school. Then we go out and educate. We also have a very cool toolkit our staff members will go through on a high school toolkit about preventing suicide. And so this is available for our staff to come out and meet with you. Our suicide prevention staff, they provide training. So actually, I believe we have 2 in Mitchell today doing community trainings, and we have 1 in Pierre as well. So in any member of the audience, if you're from a community workplace, from a business workplace, or working with youth, there's community trainings available too that I'll touch on in a little bit. Next. The other thing that we have is it's a really cool brochure. There's a brochure in the back as well. There's free online training for educators in South Dakota. If you go to sdsuicideprevention.org, this is something the Helpline has partnered with that you can go, and it's 5 modules that talks about the signs and all of that. So for those in the audience, there's extra brochures out in the back. Otherwise, my contact information, or if you dial the 211 number or the 1-800-273-TALK, you can always get connected and we can get you these resources as well. So this is a great brochure as well. And so some other community trainings that we do that can help, because all of us are here for a reason. We all care. We all want to help. And how can we, if you're talking with the youth, there are certain signs that Stephanie pointed out, and there are little cards in the back as well. Let me grab mine. That give the signs of suicide that you can pick up if you're in the audience. And so community trainings available. There are brochures back there as well as that. We have community trainings from 1 hour to a 2-day intensive training. And I highly encourage anyone that is working with this population or any type of population at risk for suicide to go through those trainings. They're very helpful. There are CEUs available. They're offered throughout the state. For example, Mitchell today. And so those are on our website at helplinescenter.org, and there's also through this website you can get a list as well. So I encourage you to do that. And in the Sioux Falls, Sioux Empire area, we also offer an education class for survivors after suicide, and we also offer youth classes as well. And so those, if you're having a youth that may have lost someone to suicide, or maybe you're working with a family member, we have those classes going throughout the year. We also have a support group that meets for survivor after suicide that meets on a monthly basis, and so those are, we can always get you connected with that if you have someone that would be of interest to them. And then another thing that we do is we have a Step Forward to Prevent Suicide walks. We have them in Brookings, Sioux Falls, Watertown, and Pierre, and those are held April through September on various days. And this is a wonderful opportunity. It's a healing process and just a great time to come together as survivors. And so I encourage you to think about and look into those. And finally, we provide, if you are dealing with a family, we have a family guide for suicide prevention. So if you're dealing with a family or youth, there is a great guide for family that we can have access to. And also, we do surviving after suicide packets. And so if you know someone who has lost someone to suicide or is dealing with that, it's a great packet we provide free of charge, full of resources available to that family, to that person affected, because we know it's a long journey ahead to healing. And so those are just some of the services, and I got the 2-minute warning. But if you have any questions at the end, or always feel free to go to helplinescenter.org or on our 211 or the National Suicide Prevention line, you can reach us.
Great. Thank you so much, Betsy. We really appreciate that information. And what I'd like to make sure that we encourage everybody to do, whether they're online or they're with us today, is to get information and resources for yourself so that you can be aware, that you can be prepared to respond if need be, and that you know how to respond appropriately. Mm-hmm. So those things are really important, especially as we're dealing with something as sensitive as suicide. We're going to go ahead and jump right back in with Rod Ward. Rod works at Keystone Treatment Center. He's a counselor, and he's got a great deal of experience with the suicide response in Native communities, both around in the U.S. and in Canada. I'll let him speak about that if he wishes, but he's got a lot of great information that he's going to share with us today. So go ahead, Rod.
Well, first of all, I thank you for all inviting me here. Growing up on a reservation back in Canada, there was a lot of abuses that were handed down, cycles of abuse. We talk about historical trauma. Where did we learn the abuses? And we learned that from, the schools, the boarding schools, and eventually we started passing that down. We became good students. We started passing that down to our own people, the sexual abuses, the emotional abuses. And so as a helper over the years, being back home, there wasn't any support. There was no support. So the addiction took over for a lot of our people. And so eventually when I started leaving and started asking for help, today now I'm 24 years sober. I've been a helper. I've been going to work in the prisons in Canada and different reservations on suicide, on traumas, on different kind of crisis. I do a 3-day trauma workshop, and every time I get called, it's always to different communities that deal with suicide, that deal with addictions, that deal with trauma. So, but looking at my own experiences, when I turned around and looked all over the place back home, there was no support. And so any support that was coming in, there was a trust issue. And so those were always the barriers. And so over the years, there's been communication, there's been a lot of mended fences and a lot of really good support that is needed and being offered and accepted. And so today, when I was talking to Matt there, I just recently come back from Canada. I wasn't there in November, and I wasn't there, I'm not even 2 weeks ago. And what had happened was one of the reservations, they dealt with a suicide with their young men. So when I went into the community, and I was going to do my trauma workshop on post-suicide, and start talking about healing with the family. And then that night, they had suicide again, and with the male. And so that whole week, it turned into suicide pacts. It turned into community interventions, crisis intervention. And so we had the mental health team, and we had the addiction team. And so what had happened was we looked at taking care of the community. We had our elders, we had our pastors, we had all the community support, child welfare workers, mental health. We had wraparound services. Because even though we're looking at the warning signs and the signals, we also realize that even if there's one going on, there might be 2 or 3 also. And at this time, when we talked about the texting, there was Facebook, there was Snapchat, and within that whole week that I was doing these workshops, there was 2 families and their kids that ended up in my workshop, and they had a suicide pact. So media is actually playing a big part of those types of intervention. And so it was powerful and it was a mixed message, but we had the families, the parents, and the kids talking about how angry I was at you because you're attempting. You didn't. So it was an amazing place to be, to have the mental health team there. So we end up taking care of this family and this community. And so when we have that kind of crisis going on, a lot of the people leave and they come into urban settings like this. And so that transfer of lack of skills is brought here. And today we see that. And so I always wanted to make it a universal problem, that everybody has a timeline of abuses. Everybody has a timeline of anything that happens to them, and where do they turn to. And so working at Keystone, you know, we have to understand that some of these induced behaviors because of addictions come. I remember talking with my nephew who had drug psychosis, and he was talking about the voices in his head saying, I'm going to kill my mom. What do I do? And I had to tell him, don't listen to those voices, get help. And so those are the things that are all across North America. So how do we take a look at taking care of this problem? And I really am glad about understanding where does the birth of that. And when we look at oppressed people raise oppressed people, hurt people raise hurt people, angry people raise angry people. And so we could point a finger at, okay, that will make sense. But what we're talking about, and I'm really glad that the speaker before said perfection. You could have the nice family, you could turn around and good grades, but then if you're mentally abused, saying you have to get this good grade, and when things happen, and then it becomes a mental health issue. So when we're looking at the support, it's very needed, because where I come from, youth workers get 2 hours training. Every frontline worker gets 2 hours training of suicide. So it's a must. If you're going to work in front of somebody, you need to have this training. And that's what we look at, is how are we preparing ourselves as helpers? How are we understanding? And so if we take a look at the hotlines, we take a look at it, take advantage of those trainings, because then when you're in front of somebody, you know if they're in the middle of addictions, if they're in the middle of negative thoughts and suicide thinking, then you're armed for that. And so that's what I look at. And today, now, I went back again to the same community to do the workshop. And I had the addiction team, and I had the mental health team. And I did a workshop for them. And so when I did the work, I said, we cannot even do the work of speaking to these mental health issues if the person is not sober. And so how do you wrap around the services? So we brought every resource team to the table. And today we always look at how do we raise the family, how do we raise the community. And so when we look at the urban setting like this, I am really blessed that we come together, because the information that we get off of you will go to the next person. So when you start team building, that's the most important thing. And some of these kids in these crises in that week were saying, I didn't realize everybody cared. And that was the gift. And so now I'm in contact with these teens and these young adults, Facebook. And every now and then they'll, hey, uncle, I'm going through this. And then I would tell their support worker, well, do you mind if I tell, because I'm concerned? No, I just want to let you know, but go ahead. And media and all of these things that are helping, we take advantage of that. So I just want to share my part of that, you know, because when we're looking at team building and understanding, we have to understand the birth of these abuses. How is it transferred? And so that was my talk for today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rod, and I'm very grateful for that. And when I was talking with Rod over the phone in preparation for this event, he had mentioned something that was so key, in that how we respond to suicide also plays into prevention of the next suicide, especially when we start looking at clusters of suicides, at suicide pacts, at how it affects the community. And when people realize that somebody cares, then then we have a better chance of preventing the next suicide. And I just thought that was so profound, and I appreciate that greatly. What we're going to do is I'm going to try to link in with Clark Flatt, and I'm going to call him on the phone. Call Clark Flatt.
Don't engage that until you're ready, because it may be loud. Until you're done dialing,
Okay.
and then wake up.
Okay, I see him here. No, I'm not going to mute this yet. 'Cause we're,
You can actually leave that hot. We're not going to turn up the volume on the TV. I don't trust it.
well, hello, Clark. How are you? Well, you give me just a second here. I'm going to try to link you in to a speaker. Let me see.
Search under Bluetooth,
I don't even know.
and then it's HK unit. Connect. There's no password. And then bring Stephanie in on secondary call for Q&A. That's both a speaker and a microphone.
Let's see. I'm not finding this on my Bluetooth. Clark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. Well, do you want to take a look at this, Eric?
The blind leading the blind.
Yeah. Okay, come on over. It's on. Was not finding it.
It's all our protocol stuff, huh? Well, I can call him on my phone and hook right up on it if you'd rather do that.
Okay, let's do that. Clark, Eric's going to call you back on his phone, and then we're going to link you in through a Bluetooth speaker, and then you'll be mic'd up. Okay.
So we are doing these series once a month on the 4th Thursdays of the month, and by next February the 25th, we will have this ironed out. That I can guarantee you.
We did a test run, and it all seemed to work okay, but now...
Yesterday, this was so slick that we thought we could even sleep in past 4 a.m. All right, what's his number? I can't read that.
615. I'll put it in.
615
406
All right.
6333.
All right.
Now everybody's got Clark's cell phone number, so good.
In the whole world. But he also, this is a microphone too, so. I hope that's what he's answering.
I said, I appreciate you putting my phone number out there for everybody.
Great. Clark, you can mute your computer as well.
Oh, wait a minute.
Could you mute your microphone?
All right, we still working,
Yep.
Perfect.
but I can't hear you.
Okay, that helps with the feedback loop.
No.
No, it doesn't.
Yep.
Nothing to do with it. Is that better?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, it's louder.
That's what we're going to do.
That's what we got. Okay. Clark, thank you for joining us. I'm going to introduce you, if that's okay. Can you still hear me fine?
Yeah, you got my sound good?
Yes, and I believe the folks who are streaming online can hear you as well. We've got audio, we've got video. We are ready to rock and roll. Okay.
Good deal.
Clark Flatt is the president of the Jason Foundation. He's located in Tennessee, and the Jason Foundation has started in Tennessee with the intent to be in Tennessee, but now they're in 36 different states. And this issue is so big that Clark has found a way to really grow awareness of teen suicide and help on the prevention side. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about that, and you just rock and roll, Clark. We're so glad you could join us. We've got about 30 people or so live in our midst, and then we have about 40 people streaming online.
Well, great. I see some old friends that we met while we were up there. It's good to see some of you and talk and be able to share this time. You asked to speak a little bit about the Jason Foundation. So many people probably there heard about us or was at one of our events up there. But yeah, we started. I lost my youngest son, Jason, to suicide in July the 16th, 1997. He was 16 years old, and it was one of those things that I hear from parents so many times now that there was, at that time, I would have said no warning signs, but now in looking back in retrospect, there were warning signs. I just didn't know how to recognize them, let alone what to do if I saw them. So after losing Jason, I had some friends kept telling me to try to find something good in Jason's death, and I'll be honest with you, you really don't want to hear that if you've lost a child in any fashion. But luckily they stayed after me, and I remember still very clearly going to the internet and just typing in youth suicide. In September of '97, suicide was the third leading cause of death for young people. Ages 15 to 24 was the age group they used at the CDC at that time. When I saw that stat, it was really the beginning of the Jason Foundation. Like many of the people there or your listeners, we had, I went to every PTO, PTA, church group about drugs, alcohol, even a form of bullying back then, on how to raise my two boys and how to protect them the best way I could and give them the best life that I could. But no one in Jason's 16 years, or his older brother, 19 at the time, had ever had a seminar, training session on youth suicide awareness and prevention. Despite the fact that at that time it was the third leading cause of death, only surpassed by unintentional injuries, number one, and number two was homicides at that time. But when I saw that, we decided with a group of friends, as you said in the beginning, to start the Jason Foundation for bring up awareness to basically parents only. We were zeroing in on parents across Middle Tennessee and hope to do all of Tennessee one day. And so we started the Jason Foundation officially in October of 1997. We've been blessed, just like the good folks there at Keystone who have partnered up with us. We've been blessed with some good partners over the year. We started growing. In 1997, there were really very few resources for youth suicide awareness and prevention. It's because of the need was so great and the resources and the organizations so few. We started growing at a rapid rate, especially some of the folks that we partner with, like the home company for Keystone, the Acadia folks. We got with some really good partners that have helped us grow, and now we're right at 100 offices, and we project to be about 125 by the end of 2016. One thing we always note, we always provide our programs, resources to people that we contract with at no charge. And so that's a big part of our work. That was real easy in 1997 to do that, because hardly anybody was using our materials. But it really gets a lot tougher now. We just had almost right at 4 million go through one of our programs, or resources are impacted by one of our programs in 2015. So it's getting to be a larger challenge, but we really enjoy the challenge. And working with the fine folks in South Dakota, we appreciate this opportunity. And I think you want to talk about the Jason Flatt Act, but I'll let you lead the conversation from there.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about where we're at and about the Jason Flatt Act. And Clark, you fill in. Is that what you're asking me to do?
That, or I can talk about the history of it a little bit. You can fill in the people where we're at in South Dakota.
Okay, let's do that. You talk about the history of Jason Flatt Act.
All right.
Very exciting.
Okay. We've been training. One of our earliest programs, 2001, was providing in-service training to teachers. We were doing that from 2001 till 2007. We became an idea that this was so important and so making such an impact, the providing this training to teachers, that we were trying to make sure that all teachers could get it. The best way is to do it through the in-service requirements, or in some states, the professional development. And so in 2007, we proposed in Tennessee what the legislator named after my son Jason, called it the Jason Flatt Act of Tennessee. And we introduced that in 2007, and we passed it. And when we passed it, it became the most inclusive, almost aggressive in-service training requirement for teachers in youth suicide awareness in the nation at that time. What it required was every educator in the state of Tennessee had to have 2 hours of youth suicide awareness and prevention training each year in order to be certified to teach in the state of Tennessee. Basically, what that meant, if you didn't get training, if it wasn't 2 hours training, you lost your certification. If you lost your certification, you could not teach, you could not work within the school system. So it was a very effective one, and it really took off. It had the support of the Tennessee Teachers Association. It had the Department of Education's support, and it also, it doesn't mandate that you use the Jason Foundation materials, but if it's introduced as the Jason Flatt Act along the model that we have built, we can give it to a state at no fiscal cost, and that's really big now. We passed it in Tennessee 2007. We just passed it in the 16th state in June of 2015, the end of the legislation. That was Texas, 340,000 teachers. It was phenomenal. That was a big event, a big test there. So we've done it in 16. As you know, we're working in South Dakota. We have 5 states that are currently working with us to explore implementing the Jason Flatt Act in 2016. And why that's important, we're talking about no fiscal note. There is a fiscal note to us. It's a fairly large expense for us to do this. We have said for the first 25 states that we will guarantee that there will be no fiscal note. After that, we'll have to reassess. I'm not sure that we can still offer it at no cost after we get past that. We will to the states that have passed it, but for the future states, that's something, and it's also an incentive for those states to go ahead and move on it. But you might want to catch them up on South Dakota.
I will do that, Clark. Thank you. We've been working very closely with Clark Flatt at the Jason Foundation to pass in South Dakota the Jason Flatt Act. The Jason Flatt Act is a little different in each state because the teaching requirements are a little bit different. But as Clark said, it would require teachers to take, in South Dakota, we're saying at least 1 hour. Because there are a lot of different trainings out there, we're going to say at least 1 hour of training in suicide prevention and awareness per certification cycle. So we're not adding hours to the teachers' requirements. That's a big issue. We don't add anything to teachers. We're using their existing hours of certification, and we're moving this from the elective column to the required column. Same amount of hours, just adding that focus on teen youth suicide prevention and awareness. And so we're doing that, and we're providing that at no cost, because we know that through the Jason Foundation and through some other places, this training is available for teachers at no cost. The helpline also offers a training at no cost for teachers. That's, I think, an hour and a half training.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've included at least 1 hour in our language, so that would be included. That other trainings that meet the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish can be included in our bill. And I'm very grateful for that. Right now, we've been working with a lot of people in the legislature. I was up in Pierre last week and the week before, and Marty Jackley is very enthusiastically supportive of our bill. That carries a lot of weight. The Secretary of Education is very supportive of our bill. That means a lot to us. We've also got sign-ons, or what are called co-signers on our bill. We've got 30 within the legislature and the Senate, and it's being dropped today. Our bill is going to be dropped today. So if any of you are in the advocacy world, or you feel strongly about this issue, whether you're in here or online, if you're in South Dakota, email your representatives, email your senators, let them know that you support the Jason Flatt Act to prevent teen suicide. When Tennessee passed this law, Clark didn't say this, but when they passed this law, within 3 years, they reduced the rate of teen suicide in Tennessee by 28%. So we know that this does make a difference. We know that when teachers are trained, it does make a difference. There's a lot of good research on who do students go to, who is that trusted adult. The Jason Foundation did a survey and found out primarily it's a teacher or a friend. And if they're not, and if they're going to their friend, you know who the friend's #1 resource is? The teacher. So the teachers are on the front line of this epidemic. And through proper training, we can save a lot of teen lives in South Dakota, and we believe that it's worth doing.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything, Clark?
Well, it's important. I think you hit on it too. The mission of the Jason Flatt Act is not to make. We're just going in with. We just got off the phone for an hour with another state. I can't say what state it is because we're still in the process of introduction. It's supposed to be probably introduced Monday or Tuesday of next week. But it's very important to know that Jason Flatt Act's goal is not to make teachers counselors. In fact, we err on the other side very strongly that this is just to give teachers the information, tools, and resources to help them better be able to recognize or respond to a student who might be struggling with suicidal thoughts. And so we're not, it does not try to create the counselor type of atmosphere. It doesn't say you sit down with a young person, you do the counseling. In fact, we in all of our programs and some of the other ones you mentioned that we know about, the programs do just the opposite. We're trying to equip you to be able to know how to identify and know how to refer within your own school's protocol. And if your school doesn't have a protocol, that's the important part. It encourages them to then create a protocol so that they'll be ready. You're not running around trying to figure out how you're going to respond when such a situation comes up. So it's very important that we're not trying to make teachers counselors and add to that.
One of the things that I failed to mention is that right now, school districts are liable to lawsuits around teen suicide. If a teen does complete suicide, there can be lawsuits around that. And in other states that's happened, in South Dakota probably too, but with this law, if the teachers are trained and we pass this, it shields the schools and the teachers and the districts from legal liability related to teen suicide. The way that comes in is that teachers are mandated reporters already. We're not imposing a new requirement, okay? Teachers are already required to be mandated reporters, as are many of the folks in this room. And that means a mandated reporter of not just physical and sexual abuse, but also of emotional abuse, understanding signs of concerns and warning signs as it relates to suicidal ideation. Lawyers get into this and they say, oh, well, teachers should have seen it coming. They should have seen it, they should have responded a certain way. With this training, we'll be arming the teachers to actually respond in the way that they're already required to do so under the law. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? So we're not adding a new requirement. We are requiring that they take the training, but it fulfills a requirement that they already have, which is to be reporters of abuse and neglect. And so we're going to, by doing that, we're going to shield them from the legal liability.
Yeah, on the shielding, you're right. One of the questions we've seen brought up has been if a suicide should happen and should a legal process begin. One of the first questions they ask is, have your teachers been trained? Of course, nothing can shield you completely from a lawsuit, but it does insulate that part when they bring it up and go, well, you're a mandated reporter. Suicide has been declared a national public health issue. 16 other states have already passed requirements for their teachers to be trained. Why didn't you do that? And so it takes away that part of that legal process. And I think also, like you said, it very much answers the mandated reporter part when it says, have you received the training? So as far as I want to make sure that people doesn't think that when we say shield, that it completely keeps you from having a lawsuit. You can have a lawsuit over anything, but it does take away an important process of that where they will try to get some of the process on the lack of having training, that you should have had that, and that's where the negligence comes into play.
Okay. Great.
Quick question for Clark. He talks about the triangle, the real key components. You can ask him this question,
okay.
But teachers were just one part of that triangle.
Can you speak to your triangle?
Parents,
teachers, parents?
Yeah, I heard him.
Okay.
Yeah, we call it the triangle of prevention. We've been doing that since 2001. It was interesting. About 6 years ago, SAMHSA came out and they published the triangle. They spent a lot of money for their triangle, but what it was a collaborative thing where they showed that when you want to do anything in prevention, and we could be talking about smoking or drinking, anything to do in prevention with adolescents, it has to entail 3 different areas. The young people themselves, teachers and youth workers, and the third part of the triangle was parents/communities. I think it's awfully important that even though the Jason Flatt Act is very important, and as I told you when we were up there, I think the single most action a state can do in impacting youth suicide is to pass the Jason Flatt Act and train your teachers. That's the most impacted, but it's not the total answer. You still have to have the programs there for the young people. They see the changes in their friends way before anybody else. And again, not to make them counselors or not to get them in a position where they're counsel a friend that is struggling, but to help them be able to recognize and know how to respond within their school again. Who can you go to in your school? So we got to have the programs for the students, and then of course we can't leave out the parents and community. It's awfully important. I just had a major meeting with a good segment of the Boy Scouts, and we're talking about doing something with them because they brought it up to us. Boy Scout leaders have such a rapport and such an ongoing exposure with young people that they wanted to talk about training their scout leaders. So I think it's important that you have to hit all 3 areas if you're going to have the most successful prevention program you can have.
Absolutely. We're going to move into the Q&A time. And I don't know if we've set up the link for folks online to be able to submit questions.
No.
Not yet? Okay.
There might be backup.
We're working on that right now. If it comes live to you, great. If not, next month, that's our goal, is to have online comment question submittal that they can type in. If you've got a question now, can you just pass them forward or pass them over to us?
Josh, can you see if there's any?
Or maybe Josh will walk up and down the aisle, collect questions. If you've got any questions.
Do we have Stephanie on the other phone?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have all kinds of people
Yep.
on the phone.
We got resources.
Well,
You got to watch Matt pushing buttons. He's liable to put me right off the line.
any questions at all?
Does any, okay, now we have some people writing questions.
You can just speak them out, and then you could repeat.
Yeah, that'll probably be easier.
Let's do that.
Do you want to just speak them out and then I'll re-ask? Okay, go ahead.
So I'm a first-year mentor through Lutheran Social Services, and currently I'm just doing the Everyday Heroes, they call it. So I have a 10-year-old, but they do have the U-Mentor program, which is aimed at the high school population. So I was just curious if Lutheran Social Services is using any of these trainings for their mentors.
Is anyone here from Lutheran Social Services?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, we actually are from LSS, but we're from the foster care program. But I certainly know that in training for their mentor program, they do regular ongoing trainings, and I have seen that topic come up. So it's definitely kind of in their repertoire of what they're doing for the mentors.
And then usually they also send out a newsletter with trainings. And so I will double check with that I believe our information has gone out for specific type of trainings through that. But the Helpline Center training, it's free. Like we have youth mental health first aid that would be open to anybody that could take.
Yep.
And how about Clark? Does Jason Foundation online? Do they have something specifically for mentors?
Clark, can they log in under the teacher training if they're a mentor?
Oh, yes. So when you go to and that's important, I want people to see what we're doing the push. If you go to the jasonfoundation.com and go to the teacher online library, you'll be brought up to a screen that has one set where if you're a Jason Flatt state, you go in that Jason Flatt Act state and you click on it. The other one is all others. You would have to go into the all others, and that's a general site. But you can log in as a mentor there and take it. That's open to the general public. The other one, the difference is when we go to these states and we make the, I guess, the commitment to make sure that the Jason Foundation online library is the fail-safe. What we've seen in every state where we've passed this is that your NAMIs, your crisis centers, your helplines, people like that that have programs, a lot of them are used in the local schools, and the online library is used for, our online library is a backup, or in a lot of cases, if there are more rural school systems, maybe for the whole school district. But we've had to commit to them. They can get online. We have about a 99.4% access rate on that, and it's going to get better. We're just putting $40,000 in it this spring to broaden the base. We had about 124,000 teachers train online last year. So, and they do it a lot. And they do it at the same time. So many guys really puts a strain on the system. But you can go on the other side, the general public. It's just that if there's a lot of people on there at one time, you might have to wait some time. On the left side, though, when you sign on that as a Jason Flat Act state, you should be at the highest broadband that we can get. And so it's that's more assured there. But anybody can use the general public one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you can take those trainings online if they're not already offered through a mechanism that you're in touch with. And they may be, they may not be. I don't know how that training works at LSS, but great question. Thank you.
I'm sure it's like the other people that use the online that you do need a high-speed connection, though. Just some of the slower speeds won't work.
Okay. You had a question, sir.
Yeah. Just overall, from year to year, is the country seeing an increase in the rate of suicides among teens or youth?
Okay. The question is, I'll just...
I was going to say, if there has been an increase, what does each presenter believe is the biggest contributing factor to that?
Okay. The question is there nationally an overall increase in the rate of teen suicide? And if so, what might some contributing factors be to that? And so I'm going to start by posing that question to Clark, since he's the national guy.
Yeah, well, what we've seen, Matt, is you're right. You know, when I said when we started the Jason Foundation, 1997, suicide was the third leading cause of death. It stayed the third leading cause of death for approximately 15 years. It has now moved up, and now it's also important that the CDC and NASA has changed the age groups. They now, it used to be 15 to 24. The span that they look at most of the time now is 10 to 24. It actually had a decreasing factor in it for a while, but now suicide went up, I think it was a little over 2 years ago, to the second leading cause of death for young people across the nation, ages 10 to 24. In fact, you can add numbers 5 through 10 together, and you lose more young people to suicide than you do number 5 through 10 combined. So it has, we have seen an increase, really, especially as far as the gender. We've seen a large increase nationally in the females ages 10 to 19. You know, girls attempt suicide at a rate 3 times higher than boys nationally. Boys have historically completed suicide 4 times higher than girls. What's really scary for people like us at the Jason Foundation who work in this area across the broad scale of the nation, we're seeing that start to swap over some. We're seeing a higher suicide rate, not just the attempt rate, but the suicide rate within that 10 to 19-year-old girls. If they're attempting at a rate 3 times higher than boys, if that rate now starts to be where it's a fatality rather than an attempt, we're going to see, I'm afraid, a continued increase in suicide rates youth suicide rates across the nation.
Good. Does that answer your question? Okay. Did you have something?
What do you see in mind for maybe contributing factors to an increase?
I think it's the pressure that youth have. And a lot of those text messages and phone calls, social media is great for connection, but it's also a tool of isolation. And so a lot of times on those text messages, they are feeling overwhelmed with the pressure to succeed, but also juggle everything, all the messaging coming to them, and they start to lose track of what is reality versus what am I seeing on Facebook. Like, all my friends, they post all of this. Well, is that that's not their whole life they're posting. Well, some people it is, but they're not posting all the negative that they may be feeling too, and so that person feels more and more isolated. And so that's one thing that we see is the impact of social media, and then just the pressure to live up to that.
I have something.
Go ahead. Thank you.
When we look at a couple of the core factors of trauma, one, but when we look at addictions, it's changed over, the type of chemical drugs. As an addiction worker, it's almost, it's not a joke, but it's kind of like, oh, we have mental health and we have crystal meth. And then when the other counselor gets somebody with alcohol, we kind of feel like, wow, you got a good patient, alcohol, because alcohol back then was an old drug. Now today you have so much factors of trying to dealing with the disease and then the mental health and all the factors of that. But aside from all of that, when we do remove the alcohol and the drugs, we're dealing with the mental health. And a lot of times there's a big thing that when I was working with the gangs in the prisons, it was rites of passage, your identity. Because I have a patient right now who been traumatized by his dad verbally and emotionally, and he used pills to numb out. Now he's dealing with removing the drugs. He's having a conversation about it with his dad. Then guess what? He's a parent, and he was even thinking about suicide before he came to prison. To the treatment center. And then all of a sudden he's like, "So you're saying I just have to let that go and heal?" And I said, "That's a process." He's going to be looking at support, but at the end he's going to be saying, "Well, I'm my own dad. I'm my own person." And then once I said, "Yeah," and I told him, "Repeat after me. You're not," and he said his dad's name. And he started crying, and he says, "I never knew about rites of passage." And so a lot of times that identity today is always the main factor is, who are you? And so when we simplify it, because every time they move from teenagehood, I could guarantee it, if we say, how many of you would want to go back to being a teen, nobody will put up their hand because it was confusing back then, right? But today, when we help people, we just say, well, how do you parent yourself? And that's the part, and that's a rites of passage. How do you parent yourself? How do you become safe? And so those are the factors we look at. So when you investigate and have a conversation, you'll find out that there was lack of parenting or abusive parenting. So
trauma.
Stephanie, you may
Trauma.
want to respond to that?
Stephanie, are you seeing any contributing factors that you'd like to speak to?
Not too many more than what I already mentioned and what both Betsy and Ron have mentioned. So.
Okay. Wanted to make sure we gave you the opportunity to chime in there from Rapid City.
I wanted to say more.
Okay. Okay. We have another question. Yes, Wendy.
Matt, do you have any statistics on South Dakota rate of teen suicide compared to the national rate? Are we also, is that only the second leading cause, or are we number 9?
Yeah, it depends on the year and it depends on the age bracket. I can give you some of that. Betsy's got some of that. What I'm given to understand was that in 2013, suicide was the #1 killer of youth ages 12 to 22 in South Dakota. In 2014, that dropped to #2 by a hair, and it was replaced by accidents in that same age range. But still, we know a lot of those accidents are really suicide, but are classified as an accident. And so technically in 2014, that data just came out about a month or two ago. And so, yeah, we're #2 now in teen suicide from 12 to 22.
Are you talking about in the nation? Or
In South Dakota.
Okay, so like nationwide, I think in
We were 18th.
2013 we were #9 highest, and then in 14 I believe we were down to 13. So we dropped a little bit.
Okay.
According to.
So where we are statewide in the nation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, that question went a little bit through my head. I'm sorry. And thank you, Colleen, for helping out. Did you guys want to chime in on that at all?
Yeah, this doesn't break out by youth because we were. This says in 2014 we were 18th in the nation, but that's all suicides.
It's all suicide. Yeah. Okay. Great. Any other questions? Yes.
I also had a follow-up for Rod. We hear so much about teen suicide and even younger children's suicide on the reservations.
Mm-hmm.
And people are always asking, what more can we do? What more needs to be done? Do you have a perspective on that, on where we need to go from here on our reservation?
Well, when we really look at people that are leaving the reservations because of these abuses, and then going back and team building with other reservations, because a lot of times when you go back as a helper, they still remember you from your history. So if you're putting up workshops, if you're doing a lot of these things, they go, oh, the old Rod, oh, the old Carrie, oh, the old. And so a lot of times we brother and sister up. So what works from one works for another. So that networking has to be, planned like that. But then when you really look at the support that's needed, a lot of times you're training, people have to leave to get to training. So, but when you're there, I have my brother that's moved back, and he's a manager for child welfare, and I give him credit because he's dealing with relatives, and traumas and abuses. So I always say, understand that suicide, and then understand your support team, and you just got to still apply, the basic tools of helping from a trauma base. And I know in Canada, the youth workers are getting trauma training. So that's the thing, and they understand that, okay, here's a troubled kid, but where did the trouble come from? And so understanding either historical trauma or complex trauma, understanding, because it does come from a different perspective from different regions too, so you got to really be educated on understanding the trauma itself.
Are you also training parents then in understanding their own trauma as that has been passed on to their children?
Yes, when I was in Canada doing this workshop, I spoke to the teens, and then we had the teen set up for treatment, then we had the family set up for treatment. Because years ago when I was doing youth work, and then I went back to my reservation, and then the community were doing all this work, and then I was visiting, and they said, well, Rod, what is your view on giving this information for the teens? And I'm like, we could give information to the teens, but we're educating them why they're upset, why they're angry, why they have these issues. But if we're not dealing with the whole family, and so a lot of times, we know that a lot of the causes of these traumas come from family. But then we have to understand where that trauma come from. So when you deal with that approach, then how do you move from that? So that's the approach.
Okay, Stephanie's got a response on that too. Quickly, Stephanie, are you there?
I am. Is the
Great.
question about what we can do to help with so many suicides on the reservations?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. I just want to re-echo what Ron had mentioned earlier about post-vention being key to helping and preventing suicide clusters. He mentioned about doing trauma training and helping with trauma. That is what I've seen a little bit and have concerns about, is to preventing clusters and contagions.
Yeah.
That's what I've seen. We've seen, and there's been so much, media can be helpful. Media has to be kind of careful, and also how you do post-vention so that we can prevent additional suicides when there's been a suicide already, especially amongst young people. And that's complex in its own, but when you deal with young people, you have to be careful how you do the post-vention. And preventing the continued suicides, making sure that you're very careful how you handle that, no matter where you're at, on or off the reservation. And that's real important, how you handle a death by suicide. So being very careful how you do that. I've seen, as you have more and more suicides, people exposed to suicide more at risk of death by suicide, suicidal ideation and attempt. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we have a loss team and we have a response team that goes out after suicide and reduce that risk of suicide, but gotta be real careful how you handle that. And that's one to be very cautious of as you do those wraparound services that Ron talked about.
Right.
That's important too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. What I'm going to do is, out of respect for people's time, we're going to wrap up questions. And if you've got extra questions, if you'd like to connect, we're going to be around. Stephanie is going to be around on my phone for a minute. I think Clark Flatt's going to be around on Eric's phone. Yep, thank you. By the way, next month, same bat channel, same bat time. We're going to be here at the bakery. We'll also be streaming live at the same link on February 25th from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Christy Alton Osmera is going to be with us from Keystone Treatment Center talking about adolescent drug trends. If you're interested to know what the new thing is on the street.
If there's more food out there, eat. Grab a
Yep.
bag.
Thank you for joining us
I live
from
in
the
Sioux Falls.
online
I work in,
community. We're very grateful you could be here.
We're good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matt. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Clark.